Diversity is a corner pillar of a principle in this thing called regenerative agriculture and regenerative farming. So at this month's virtual small farmer meetup, diversity was our main topic. And discussing it with me was Mr. Eli Mack of Mack Farms in Pennsylvania. If you go back a couple of episodes on this channel, you will find his story. But we explored diversity and what it looks like on a practical level in farming. I have condensed the best of the best and put it right here in a podcast format. This podcast can also be found on iTunes and Spotify by searching The Shepherdess. If you guys would like to join the fun and join us for our next live virtual small farmer meetup, please go to www.harmonyfarms.blog, click the tab that says Meet Farmers, and join us for the next meet. These meets happen the fourth Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Central Time. Eli, I'm going to let you intro. Diversity is actually the topic of today's meet. Intro it for me, brother.
Oh, me? Oh, me. Okay, got it. Yeah. So diversity. My mentor, Daniel Griffith down there at Tim Shell Wildman, he told me this quote. I don't know if it's his or if he got it from somebody, but resilience is diversity in motion. So when you break that down, I love this topic because every time I hear the word diversity, I basically assimilate it to stability. Okay, so when we're gonna discuss diversity tonight in a lot of different ways, but what it boils down to is getting stable. Because as always, all these things that we've been discussing here in the quotes and the comments about our hardships, our weather, all these things are pretty uncontrollable. They're out of our realm of what we can do about it. So the best safety net we can offer ourselves in agriculture and in what we do is by building diversity. And so we're going to talk all about that tonight, but that's a good segue into.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the first points that he mentioned was diversity is resilience. And that's something I've heard for such a long time. And the reality is if you can begin weaving that safety net of diversity early on, it's going to be less expensive. The learning curve is going to be less difficult because you're not going to be exploring this concept with 50 different, I guess, small scale, starting small in your diversification.
Yeah. So
on Mack Farms, let's just give some practical examples. On Mack Farms, your main enterprise is beef.
Yes.
But you've diversified. You're experimental with the sheep. You're experimental with the pigs. You're experimental with what else?
Turkeys.
Chickens and turkeys. And so you're kind of leveraging your main enterprise, your moneymaker.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, you are getting an education on how to begin filling the gap in your income with diversity, right. If I am right.
Right. Yeah. And part of that is for me, like I said, the slow turnaround time of the beef. So I needed to find ways to make those paydays come quicker in between. So that's going to come from quicker developing. And like Tim's talking about meat chickens. We talked about this in our first interview. That's like a 6 to 9 week turnaround, But basically, I looked at, I have this 20-acre block to maximize. My cows are already taking the main sweep through, but what else can fit here? What else can work with these cattle? How can we collaborate a little bit? So just started plugging things in. And I want to try a little bit of everything to know what works for me and what doesn't.
Right.
I'm kind of an addict of collecting things like that. And I don't know what I'll get rid of at this point, but I want to try a little bit of everything to get my feet wet and know what works.
Yeah. So to plug diversity from an economic standpoint, and that's how I jumped into farming. I jumped into it trying to build out how I would actually earn a living from this. So I jumped in, I wanted to do beef cattle. I built out my plan with beef cattle exclusively. And it was going to take 20 years to get to the level of profitability, which would be $30,000 a year, which is not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to take me 20 years with just beef cattle. But when I stacked with just one enterprise, which was the sheep, it brought that timeline down to 7 years. Like that was just with one element of diversity in my business plan. So that is what convinced me on diversity.
Yep. Absolutely.
Kind of an approachable way to go for it.
And I think as well, like some of us are pretty young. I don't have any kids of my own yet or anything like that. But when you look at a farm that you might want to pass down to future generations, or kids that want to do something with the farm. If we max out the beef space on our farm, maybe there's not a whole lot of room for them to grow into that and for the farm to support 2 families. So at that point, you need to diversify the farm. If you want this to be something that can carry multiple generations, you're going to have to find other enterprises to complement. It's just another point.
Yeah, it is true. And then from a practical standpoint, maybe your child won't like beef, but if you've got that diversification, they'll want to be a beekeeper or something. I don't know.
They need something else to do.
Yeah. All right, Eli, take it away with any facts that you've got going on. I'm going to be monitoring the chat.
Sure. Sounds good. So I kind of broke down diversity into a few different categories that we could talk about. And we talked a little bit here at the beginning about diversity of pocketbook, diversity of business. I think it's pretty apparent why that's important. And you're stacking those enterprises, making your business, your income as flexible and stable as possible. So another way I look at this is diversity of equipment and infrastructure. Okay, so one thing that I try to hold myself to in agriculture, there's a lot of shiny things out there, and there's a lot of commercials and ads and magazine ads for these shiny things. And I tell myself that something has to have multiple purposes for me to make the investment in it. It cannot be a one-use tool or piece of equipment that is the biggest money pit and it will suck you right in. So I try to keep myself clear of that. If I'm buying something, it has to have multiple uses, multiple tasks that it can do.
And just to ask the commenters, if you guys can say, input something that's been from your farm that really directly ties to what Eli just said. Is there a multiple use item that you have on your farm that's diverse, whatever? Yeah.
So I think some of the leeway we give ourselves there is with the side-by-sides and the 4-wheelers and the tractors. Those are all nice and those are all really handy. I try to force myself to do as much by hand as possible, because guess what? The cold day that the tractor doesn't start for you is a really, really sad day, So I like to avoid that stress. And I like to try to make my operation function as much as possible by hands and feet. I think that's a safe way to get things going. Equipment is great. I love it. Use equipment, but just something to think about. Another thing would be scale of permanence. This is kind of like a permaculture concept here. Some things are beyond our control, like the weather that we discussed, but other things are more in our control, like farm roads and where we put gates and where we put fences. So I would challenge you guys to diversify your farm by not cornering yourself with putting a gate here. What if you didn't need gates? What if you had a gate that moved and that way you didn't have ruts in the same spot all the time? Or, farm roads, make sure they're where you want them. And I'm just trying to help you guys brainstorm a little bit. Infrastructure, once it's there, and it's really, really hard to move. So especially when you're starting, it's good to try different things, see what works, see what doesn't. And if something really works, okay, make that permanent. It makes sense. You got to go from there. Does that make sense? So
it does, yeah. So one of the things I've really tried to be careful about up front is the infrastructure and making it as portable as possible, if that makes sense. My infrastructure consists of electric fencing, portable posts, and we're just now getting to the place where we feel confident enough with this sheep thing. We're making a little bit more of a specialized handling system for them. But besides that, I have no industry-specific infrastructure and no plans, for it in the future.
Yeah. And I think permanent buildings are another thing. Build them in a way that can be used for livestock, getting equipment in there, make things easy to pull in and out of, so you don't have to pull out 5 things to get one piece of equipment out. Just try to make your infrastructure, your facilities as flexible as possible. And then I think another point I had on here was just you are the ultimate tool of your farm. The human body, the human mind is the ultimate vehicle, the ultimate inspiration for your farm. So the more diversified you can make yourself, the more of a lethal weapon you are on your farm. And that's part of what you guys are doing here today, which is awesome. You're showing up, you're getting a diversity, a spray, an array of thoughts and concepts from other people. You are building yourself as a human tool by being here. And that's fantastic. Like, you cannot beat that knowledge. You won't lose if you acknowledge that you are the ultimate tool and you need to diversify. And then I have quotes here. I won't pull the books, but some of the books I'm working from is Wendell Berry, Unsettling of America. Another go-to is my Holistic Management. So both of them spend a little bit of time talking about specialization. right now we have a culture where you have mechanics, you have computer technicians, you have preachers, you have manufacturing. Everybody has their niche and they stay in it. And what that actually does is it creates more mistakes and more errors. And actually, you can track this all the way back to the time of Napoleon. And Alan Savory talks a little bit about that, where they wanted to specialize and everybody stays in their lane. And it actually makes more of a mess of things. So the more diversified we can make ourselves and less specialized, the more potent we're going to be and the better effect we're going to have in operation.
I want to bring out something that Tim said, also testing my systems before making them permanent. So this is kind of a philosophy I hold to, and I put some, I've gotten some flack for some of the equipment that I've used in some of my electric fencing setup and so forth. And my philosophy is I am going to bootstrap it until I know that this is something I'm going to hold on to for 3 to 5 years. And then once I know that I'm going to hold on to it for 3 to 5 years, then I will make the investment in longevity. But I like what Tim said, testing systems before making them. And I think that's all context.
Yep, absolutely.
Of that.
And then the last kind of note I had there as far as tools and equipment, I want to challenge you guys. Some of you guys are already going to be good at this. Some of you might be a new concept, but start to think of your livestock as your machines and your tools. I try to force myself to think of my livestock as my first tier of employees, because it's going to be a good while before I have an employee on Mack Farms other than myself eventually. So how do I make these animals do the work that I see in front of me by leveraging their natural abilities? Let me give you some examples. My Highlands with their horns are awesome brush clearers. Like if I put them somewhere and pack them in, they're going to annihilate stuff, just hands down, annihilate stuff. This winter, some of you guys may be seeing it. I'm doing bale grazing. I'm letting the litter fall, which is good. My pasture needs it, but some places it's a little bit too thick. So I go out there when it thaws and I'm hand forking stuff, which is fine. But I also had the thought, I'm moving a pen of roosters around right now just because I don't need them with my hens. I could probably turn them out and let them scratch up all my hay and manure and move it around for me. So,
and here's another thing, what I did with my sheep last year, we had a fence line that was a mess. And so I took a paddock and I made it like 1/4 of the size of what it would normally be. But there was so much brush on the fence line that it forced them to eat into that. And they didn't eat it all, but they ate enough to where I could get in easily with a chainsaw and just clear that fence line. So there, employing the basically ecological function of your animal to do that work for you.
They are your first machines. Use them. They're there and they're happy to do the work for you. And like Kat's saying here, she's saying one of the best opportunities you can do is go around and visit these operations where they're practicing these things 100%. Right. And Adam, horns, I'll comment on this because it's worth it. We've polled a lot of breed of cattle and some people are a fan of that and whatnot. But when you see the instincts a cow has with their horns, it's like a different animal. Like my bull will bend over a small tree to get the leaves off of it, and like, it's incredible. It's just incredible. So Adam, I like that comment. Horns are awesome.
I think it's nice to respect the way that God created them and to see how it can be used.
Yeah, absolutely. So
not to say that polling animals is bad. My sheep are polled, but I think there's merit in both.
Yep, absolutely. Grace, is there anything else you wanted me to hit on as far as equipment or infrastructure, diversity, things like that?
I don't know if I overlooked anybody's inputs on infrastructure that they have that's diversifiable, if that's the word.
Yeah, I like hoop pens. I like mobile pens. Obviously, our buddy Joel is fantastic for that. Tim's saying portable hoop houses. Yep, all the way.
Yeah, portability. That's kind of what when I'm a little nervous right now because we just finished up building a sheep chute, and it's the one element of my operation that's not portable. It's time and we need it, but kind of going into that, I was like,
yeah.
Farmer Nate, I'm gonna have a question for you. If I move, will you dig up my sheep chute for me and move it with me? I think that's it. We can move on.
Oh man. So I think using your livestock as your first tier of employees kind of segues into the natural talk of multi-species as diversity. And we unfortunately have this concept that nature is very competitive, dog eat dog, and we see documentaries about that, but there's also, I think, a little bit larger aspect of symbiosis out there in nature. And I think something we need to acknowledge in nature and amongst ourselves is that there's more collaboration than there is competition. And I'll just give you some shotgun examples of this out there in nature. The classic one that we always see is like the buffalo or the water buffalo with the bird or the egret sitting on it. And that bird is getting a free ride and a free meal from the bison. The bison is getting picked clean of pesky bugs and insects. So two totally different things teaming up, having a combined effect that is mutually beneficial. Collaboration is all over nature, and we need to tap into that. Another cool one that I read about when I was looking this up was the ostrich and the zebra. Hunted by the same fast predators, the ostrich has a good taste of smell but poor eyesight. The zebra has good eyesight but poor sense of smell, and you will usually find them hanging out together in nature so that they can leverage each other's strengths to avoid the predators. And that's crazy. Another cool one was a crocodile with a plover bird, like with a really long beak on it. That bird will sit in the open crocodile's mouth and pick its teeth clean because it's getting a free meal and the crocodile is getting a free dentist bill. So, I mean, that's kind of my point is there's collaboration all over nature. It's not strictly competition like we think it is. So if we can bring that into our farms with the species of livestock that we choose and how we use them, I think everybody benefits, honestly.
Yeah.
So when we think about our grazers or our ruminants, so cattle, and you guys can, correct me on statistics, however you feel, because some of us are more specialized in one species or another, but cattle are more like 80% grazers, 20% browsers. Sheep are kind of like 50-50, and goats are flipping the spectrum at 80% browse, 20% graze, so there's pockets where, say, my cattle move through a section and they take what they want. Maybe there's something left for the sheep that the cattle aren't a big fan of, but my sheep can help keep in a vegetative state. I think that's the classic example that we all think about when we talk about multi-species grazing.
And then the other kind of contribution to that is that with the sheep and cows thing, it is a huge multi-species benefit, widely recognized. But the sheep will actually eat your pastures out of weeds that will, really significantly decrease your grass growth. So grazing these in succession or in a multi-species situation, that's one of the benefits. Tim wants to know how this looks on your farm. I think you kind of touched on that a little bit, Eli, but what does can you pull some examples straight from your farm, straight from ground?
With the multiple species?
Yeah, multi-species thing, how you're using it and how you see it playing out, at Mack Farm.
I'm trying to get my sheep to stay in the same paddock as the cows. So far, that hasn't turned out exactly the way I want it to. So they're following right behind, and they are cleaning up those stockier things that the cattle leave behind. Now, keep in mind, Highlands are pretty darn good foragers. They're not super picky, and they eat a lot of things that I haven't seen other cattle eat. So I'm using the sheep to help clean up. The chickens come in. They help move my manure around. In nature, like we discussed, birds are kind of the cleanup crew behind all of these herbivores moving across the landscape. So
sanitation, I think, is
sanitation. So we have this whole other enterprise already on the farm that, again, can be an employee of mine and be the sanitation crew, and they can follow the cattle all the while dropping their specific manure that helps meet other needs of the soil and the biology. They can clean that up. I'm going to be bringing in the ducks and geese, and they're a little bit more of weeders, so they're going to pull out those final things, drop their manure. Honeybees are going to offer a pollination, I like to encourage and help pollinators. And pigs, I'm still working on, still very new to pigs, still very scared of pigs and what they can do because they are powerful animals. So I'm still learning.
Anybody out there have pigs? Can they leave it in the comments? Let us know if you like them or not.
I'm trying to catch this question real quick here. Tim, how would you manage animal days when putting multiple species in a paddock? So I think, Tim, what you're referring to is a little bit more specific formula. You would break that down by weight. You would assign your average average animal weight for a cow, average animal weight for a sheep, and then combine that into pounds. So then you would make your animal days based off of a total weight and not a head count. Does that make sense?
And Tim, oh, sorry, I'm going to plug my own YouTube account, but I created a calculating paddock size video, and I created a worksheet, with a formula that worked really well for me when I launched my rotational grazing. And it, like Eli said, I went by animal units, which is 1,000 pounds worth of animal.
Awesome.
And that worked for me, but watch it in collaboration with the video, because I think, Eli, you probably second this, but when it comes to rotational grazing, it's like 90% observation, 10% calculation,
Yeah, you got to really calibrate your eyeball. I'm still doing it. I'm not there yet. I'm still trying to figure out if I'm overdoing it.
The beauty of it is, if you're moving them every day, you're not going to starve to death, and you'll learn really quick. Or every other day, like I am.
I was going to talk about livestock or wildlife. Is that okay?
Well, we have 8 minutes left.
Oh gosh!
So do whatever you can in 8 minutes. This is crazy how fast this has gone.
Okay. Well, then we should skip ahead to landscape diversity, because I think that's crucial.
All right.
Quick notes on wildlife. Wildlife is good. Wildlife is a gauge of how well your environment is for your ecology. If you see wildlife, it is a good sign. Try not to run them off. Try to figure out why they're there. Keep it going. Wildlife is good. You want wildlife. Diversity of landscape. So diversity of landscape. Picture with me a 70-acre field of corn. How much diversity is in that 70 acres? Probably not a whole lot, right? You can interseed it. You can do other things to establish some diversity there, but diversity of landscape is pretty crucial, because when you look at a monoculture system like we usually have in industrial ag, it is vulnerable to a lot of things. One bad weather year, one bad weather event, one bad bug, one wrong mix of spray material, and that monoculture is done. Just chalk it up to zeros and hope you got crop insurance, because it's done. So diversity, again, resiliency, stability. Try to avoid anything mono on your farm. So what I really like to talk about is edge effect. The edge effect, and kind of Aldo Leopold is the father of this edge effect. You should read some of his stuff, really good. You guys probably have already. So edge effect talks about open field, forest, and water. And the prime of life happens at the intersection of all these three zones. So, for example, on my farm, I try to leave all the brush around the perimeter of my farm, because it is wildlife highways. They are in and out of there. They're hunting. It's shelter. We've gotten so good at removing trees and shrubs from our pastures to make them open, productive pastures, but yet we've removed so much life from them. Some birds and bats will only hunt 200 yards away from a water source or their nest, so think about all the ways that you can encourage more life, more species, even if they're not owned by you on your farm, by incorporating this edge effect. So maybe that's adding more water points. Maybe that's creating more hedgerows. Maybe you break your pasture into 4 sections and you plant trees here, and bushes here. And I think this is a great point to talk about silvopasture. Silvopasture is not well understood, and I'm just starting to learn more about it. I listened to Cal's Grazing Grass podcast this week, and he had on Austin from out east in Pennsylvania, and he's a silvopasture guy. His website is awesome. It's called treesforgraziers.com, graziers, because we had that conversation what it's called, graziers. So silvopasture is, because I'm going to do it, Grace. I'm going to break out the whiteboard.
Do it.
So, we're grazing down here. This is going to be awful. We're grazing down here really low. We're taking the grass off, right? And if you want to diversify your operation, you need to occupy new space. And how do you do that? Everything down here is already taken up. You got to go vertical. You got to go vertical. You got to get those trees going, so diversity, that was totally worth it, wasn't it? The whiteboard. I knew we would need the whiteboard. It wasn't that worth it, but you need to go vertical. So silvopasture is a way that we can add diversity and add enterprises to help create this edge effect that really helps wildlife and hold life in your property. The more life, the better, guys. The more life, the better. And I'm going to keep barreling through this because I want to respect our time. I'm sorry, Grace, do you want to jump in with anything?
No, keep going. You're doing it.
Okay. So, for example, on my farm, I have a low wet spot right below our pond that is like swampy, and I kind of hate it. I kind of do hate it. But at the same time, last year we had a really dry summer, and it saved my butt, like for several weeks at a time, because it was wet enough that it kept growing. So I would encourage you guys, when you're evaluating your own property, look at those less than desirable places, but ask yourself, what does this offer? What does this offer as a safety net on maybe a drought or a flood period, anything like that?
Consider what kind of solution it can provide for you rather than considering it a problem. Go readjust your mindset and say, how can this be a solution in my context?
Yep.
Even if you have to think of an extreme case like a drought, you know?
And that's one thing that holistic management talks about. Don't manage for a negative by saying, I don't want this species growing in my pasture, so what do I do to remove it? They say, manage for what you do want. So maybe you don't want that, you want a different species. So manage to encourage that species or this type of terrain, because when we start to manage for what we don't want, it's really tempting to cut corners and take shortcuts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's true. And I got to give a shout out to my dad, because I am this kind of person where I see something that is in my way, whether it's a weed or a fence line, you know, that edge that you're talking about. And I want to just whack it down with a chainsaw. But my dad is constantly pulling me back. He's saying, let's think about this. Let's see if this could be a solution. Let's wait it out. So yeah, that's a mindset I'm guilty of, but I'm grateful for people in my life who balance it out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think just segue that into the species. I had somebody contact me on Instagram the other day. Hey, I want to get started on this. What kind of grass do I plant to get started? I just start with what you have, honestly, is the best thing you can do. But then over time, we can try to manage for having a diversity of cool season, warm season, wet growing, dry growing, all these different kind of things, depending on what weather events transpire. And I think that's pretty much a no-brainer for all of us here at this point. You know, we're saying make sure your forages cover that whole array of weather. And they're gonna provide multiple nutrient values to your animals as well.
That's really good. We still have a page and a half, but we are 40 seconds off from the end of the second live farmer meetup. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. We're gonna cap this off now. But if you would like a replay of this, as well as all the worksheets and handouts that we have put out, I'm gonna put a replay out probably tomorrow at www.harmonyfarms.blog. I'm also going to leave this page up for just a few minutes so you guys can backtrack, get each other's contacts, and please, guys, join us next month. Lord willing, we're going to have this the fourth Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Central Time, and I think, or at least I hope, that you've seen the importance of interacting like this one-on-one and creating these very, very tight-knit networking opportunities. Eli, you did an excellent job. Thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, now you have to turn off both of those buttons at the bottom.
Both of them? Okay. All right. I'm on it. I'm on it. Can you guys still hear me? I don't know if you can. I'm gonna keep talking as if it's the credits for the show. We were talking about how do I increase maximum diversity as far as a practical application for what you guys are doing out there. I would say, one, embrace an abundance over scarcity mindset. Don't fall into the fear that there's not enough out there, and this applies to your business as well. The tide will raise all ships, so get out there and do it. Don't be afraid of somebody else stepping on your toes or you cutting into somebody else's business. There's more than enough room out there for us to do it. But there is abundance in nature over scarcity as well. I would encourage you guys to observe and mimic nature. Get out there and watch how nature deals with these struggles and hardships and see how it overcomes, and then work to do that. Some of that will be done through natural systems by just kind of encouraging nature to do its own thing. Some of that will come from biomimicry, which is you using the technology at your hand to bring that about. Again, manage for positive change instead of negative change you want to see, like we talked about. Another thing would be to avoid mono anything. Don't get stuck in one or the other lane, but manage for avoiding monoculture, whatever. Encourage the edge effect on your property. Make room for wildlife and observe it as a gauge of how well you're doing. Create brush, create trees, create low, middle, and high growing species. Increase water points. Allow access in your water troughs for wildlife, and that includes a ramp in case they fall in there, they can get back out. Just provide all of those much needed things for animals, both livestock and wildlife. Stack your enterprises, use your animals, try to find no waste, put everything to use in another enterprise, and simply manage for the whole of the individual. Don't focus on one animal, one species. Manage for the whole, and everything will pretty much fall into place. Manage for the whole. Don't get stuck on individual, and simply do it. Start small and start now. Get out there and encourage and introduce diversity into your operations. So that's my quick notes. If you guys are still able to hear that, get out there and do it. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It has been a pleasure. Everybody have a good night.